In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, I am very grateful to God for giving me this blessing of being with you, and I ask Him for guidance and assistance. So, what I'm going to share with you is some reflections about unity of God and unity in God. Traditionally, we make a distinction in Shia theology between what we call principles of religion and principles of denomination. So, usul al-din, usul al-mazhab. So, we are Muslims, and we believe all Muslims and indeed all Abrahamic family, they believe in certain principles that are common. One is unity of God or monotheism, one is prophethood and revelation, and one is resurrection. But we as Shia believe in two more principles that not every Muslim may believe. One is we believe in divine justice in a special way. Every Muslim believes in divine justice, but the way we understand, and some Sunni Muslim is different from rest of Muslims. We have the idea that divine justice is something objective, something that is based on objective factors. And also imamate. We believe that in every era, God has appointed a human being to represent Him. So believe in divinely appointed leadership. So, unity of God or monotheism is a principle that is common among all Muslims and among all Abrahamic faith. So far, there is no kind of novelty or anything new. But then gradually, it became clear for me that when we say there are 3 principles of religion or 5 principles of denomination, 3 plus 2, unity of God is not just one among 3 or 5. Unity of God is the principle of principles. So everything else goes back to the unity of God. So we should understand even prophethood as a kind of extension of unity of God. We should understand resurrection or imamate, divine justice, all as extension of unity of God. The Prophet used to say in Mecca, قولوا لا إله إلا الله تفلحوا. You know, historians describe pre-Islam society as a society that suffered from ignorance. Ignorance not in the sense of lacking literacy only. Ignorance in the sense of lacking rationality. There were lots of superstitious practices and ideas there, lots of immoral issues there. To just say some, for example, they had this habit of burying their daughters for some time, not always, but after a bad experience they had in one of the battles that they had lost, and the enemies took their, women. So they started then burying their daughters alive. And the Quran says it was a source of shame and disaster if someone was informed that God has given you a daughter. So they used to bury their daughters alive. They used to loot each other tribes, attack, etc. So that society had lots of problems. But when the Prophet was addressing the people, the pagans, he didn't give them a list of 100 problems that they have to fix. This is, I think, a lesson also for us when we are trying to do some reform. We can try to fix all the problems, or we can start from one side and say, okay, I fix one by one. But the Prophet tried to understand what is the root of all the problems and fix that root. Based on his understanding, which was inspired by God, he realized that all the problems go back to lacking true sense of unity of God. So he used to say, قُولُوا لَا إِلَهَ إِلَّا اللَّهِ تُفْلِحُ. Say, not just with tongue and mind and heart. There is no God but one God, then you will have salvation. So he was focusing on the issue of unity of God. Some generations later, we have our 8th Imam, who is buried in Mashhad in Iran, who was traveling from Medina to Khorasan, northeastern Iran. He was asked by the Caliph of time that you should take power. Of course, he didn't want to give power, he wanted to use his name because he was popular among people. And the majority of people were Sunni, not Shia, but they had love for Imam because he was a progeny of the Prophet. So he didn't accept. Then he said, you must become at least the prince if you are not accepting to become Khalifa. And he didn't want, but he said, you must accept. So he said, I accept with the condition that I don't do anything with politics. I don't appoint or dismiss anyone. Anyway, in this environment that there is Abbasid Caliph ruling, majority of people are non-Shia. He was going through different cities, but everywhere he was welcomed by the people. They loved him. So in the city of Neyshabur, he was surrounded by lots of people and said, O son of the Prophet, please share with us something from the Prophet. So he's a Shia Imam, now asked by thousands of Sunni people to share with them something from the Prophet. If it was any Shia ordinary person, maybe thought now this is a good time to emphasize on some of our exclusive positions, to strengthen our position, to teach people about the Shia exclusive ideas. But to surprise, he mentioned a hadith which is very well known, which is known as golden chain hadith, because he quoted from his father and grandfather up to the first Imam, then the Prophet, and then Gabriel, and then God. He called such hadith divine saying, hadith of Qudsi. That God said, word of unity is my fortress. Kalimatu la ilaha illallah hisni. Whoever enters my fortress will be saved from my punishment. So he used this opportunity to emphasize on unity of God, which was maybe clear to everyone because all were Muslims. They all believe in the unity of God. But Imam realized that still they lack some deeper appreciation and understanding of unity of God. So he said this hadith, then he moved. Then he stopped. So that they know that this is not part of hadith. Then he made a comment on this saying. He said, بِشَرْطَهَا وَشُرُوطَهَا. Unity of God has conditions. And one of the conditions is leadership. If you are true monotheistic people, you cannot accept any person who claims to be a Muslim caliph or etc. to rule you. You have to make sure that you have leaders in power who believe wholeheartedly in authority of God in every aspect. In any case, what we find in the Prophet practice, in our Imam practice, very clearly understandable from the Quran, is that the key teaching for us is unity of God. It might be surprising for you that if you study the Quran, the amount of emphasis on unity of God is more than existence of God. The Quran doesn't discuss a lot about existence of God. Quran takes it as something obvious. There are some arguments for existence of God, but not many. The Quran tries to establish unity of God more. And therefore, you find that there are many, many verses of the Quran about unity of God. But what is important is that we need to bring unity of God into every aspect of our theology. Let me also, how I can, someone, you will.
I have to go ahead.
Okay.
What if you go ahead?
Okay, so if you go to, okay, good. For example, Allama Tabatabai in his exegesis of the Quran has this idea that the whole Quranic ethical system is based on unity of God. He said there are other models that Quran also uses. For example, sometimes you talk about good and bad outcomes and consequences of your actions. Sometimes you talk about reward and punishment. But he says the Quran has a unique way of dealing with ethics, and that is through Tawheed. So a system of ethics based on Tawheed. Then I have mentioned some reflections of unity of God in even Islamic schools of philosophy. For example, in Transcendent Philosophy of Mullah Sadra, we find that when there's a discussion about how to explain, one big question for philosophers is how to explain diversity in the existence. We believe that everything comes from God, and God is absolutely one, absolutely simple. But we have huge diversity. Where does this diversity come from? So, Mullah Sadra, the founder of Transcendent Philosophy, has this idea that existence is only one reality. We don't have different types of existence, but the difference is in the degrees of existence. So he believes in graded hierarchy of being or existence, which by itself opens room for lots of discussions. So we all, human beings, animals, etc., we all believe, according to Mullah Sadra, we share the same reality. Just the difference is that at which step of this hierarchy we are. Sorry, Mamo, can you answer? Because Mahnaz is in Istanbul airport, maybe she needs something else. Okay. So, we are traveling in different ways. Okay. Mullah Sadra is the founder of Transcendent Philosophy, but we have another school, for example, Illuminationist School of Philosophy, founded by Shahabuddin Sohrawardi. His school of philosophy is based on light, and he believes that God is light of the lights. And he says that God is absolute light, and everything created by God has some degrees of light. It's similar to the idea of Mullah Sadra, he was of course before Mullah Sadra, but his focus is on light and then relative darkness. There is no absolute darkness. Absolute darkness doesn't exist. Everything is just a matter of light. How much of light is there? And then human beings have ability to increase their light or reduce their light, to acquire more or less. So what I'm trying to say is that in not only in Islamic theology, in Islamic ethics, in Islamic philosophy, you see how understanding of unity of God and unity of the source of all the goodness affects our understanding. And they try to come up with a system of thought that is based on one source. Everything comes from God. Of course, automatically it brings lots of questions. If everything comes from God, where does poverty come from? Where does injustice come from? Where does illness come from? All these things may come to your mind, and they have tried to address these issues. We have also similar discussion in Christian theology. So, moving away from philosophy or ethics, then if we can go to everything as a sign, I tried to mention two concepts from the Quran. So, these are familiar to you as well. One is that everything is a sign of God. If you can please go further. There is a famous divine saying which is not in the Quran. It's a divine saying, it's a hadith from God. Because God sometimes has spoken to the prophets, but not in the form of a scripture. Okay? Just has communicated to them. This hadith, you find it almost in every book on Islamic spirituality. God says, I was a hidden treasure, and I wanted to be known. So I created people, or created creation, because khalaq can mean people or creation, in order to be known. So he was a hidden treasure. He wanted to be known, and then he created us. What does it mean? It means that God is not in need of having sign, but God is so generous and so kind that he would not hide himself. He would expose himself through signs. So each of us is supposed to be a sign of God. Nature is also a sign of God. Everything is a sign of God. So for us to discover God should not be difficult if we open our eyes and minds. Unfortunately, sometimes we close our minds and eyes and say, where is God? I cannot find God. We think God is hidden. But God has put lots of signs. It's like, for example, if there is a one-way road, okay? And there are lots of signs saying how many kilometers are there, what are the stations, services, lots of signs are there. It's a one-way road. But you happen to drive the opposite direction. You don't see any sign, because all the signs are facing for the people who are journeying. Yeah? So why there is no sign? Why these, signposts are empty? Because your direction is wrong. So for someone who is moving towards God, everything is a sign. For someone who is moving away from God, it's just ambiguous. So our fourth Imam says, Subhanaka ma adiyaka turuq ala man lam takun dalila wa ma awzaha al-haq inda man hadaytahu sabila. He says, may you be glorified. How narrow is the path for those you are not their guide. If God is not your guide, the path is very narrow. And then he says, how clear is the truth for the people that they have chosen you as their God. So, for some people, the path is very narrow and dark. For some people, it's very wide and clear. The same God, depending on your direction. So, we are all supposed to be signs of God and to explore signs of God. I should see in you signs of God. I should act in the way that I can be a sign of God for you. Unfortunately, human beings sometimes are not signs of God. Sometimes we want to be signs of ourselves. We want to publicize ourselves, or we want to publicize darkness. But we are supposed to be signs of God. So, according to Muslim mystics who are very sensitive to the work of God, they can see in everything signature of God. Yeah? Most of people only in miracles can see God. Yeah? If someone has cancer and doctors say, there is no treatment and this person is treated, they say this is God's work. There has to be a miracle. But when you wake up in the morning, you don't say this is work of God. You say, no, I woke up in the morning. Yeah? When you are walking, you don't say it's miracle. But if something, for example, the engine of car is broken and no one is there to repair, and then you pray and the car starts moving, say this is God. But for a mystic, everything is work of God. Yeah? Even a simple conversation that we have is work of God. Because they are sensitive enough to see hand of God in everything. And we as people of God need to train ourselves. This is very important for interfaith. Because if I am not trained enough, I can see only in my tradition and whatever exists in my tradition signs of God. I can see signs of God in Muslim art, Muslim culture, Muslim places of worship, but I cannot see signs of God in Christian art, Christian culture, Christian places of worship. But if I am a true servant of God, I can see signs of God in every tradition. Yeah? Even some mystics went so much further that they say even idol worshippers, they have never worshipped anyone other than God. Like Ibn Arabi. Ibn Arabi says everyone who has worshipped anyone has worshipped only God. But mistakenly, maybe they have identified God with some object. Or anyone who has loved anyone, even if, for example, someone has loved, he mentions Zainab and Su'ad and Hind, the names of women. He says they have loved God, but they saw these as manifestations of beauty of God. So they go to the extent that they say everywhere you can see God. But for sure, when it comes to religious communities, you can see God more clearly. Another concept is face of God. We have this concept in Islam, we have this in Judaism and Christianity. For example, in chapter 2, verse 115, God says, أَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Wherever you turn, you see the face of God. In Psalms, we read, seek the Lord and his strength. Seek his face continually. So, this is a challenge for us. Can I see face of God in places of worship of another faithful community or not? For example, if I as a Shia cannot see face of God in Sunni Islam, in Sunni mosques, if I can only see in the Shia mosque, this is a challenge. Or if I cannot see face of God in church or synagogue or monastery, it's a problem. The Quran considers all places of worship as sacred places. But why I as a Muslim cannot see value in them? It's a problem. I should be able to see face of God everywhere. I should feel connected to God more easily in a church than on the street. Yeah, when a place is, devoted to God, I should feel very comfortable. But I know there are Muslims who don't feel comfortable in a church, and there are Christians who don't feel comfortable in a mosque because they only see face of God in their own place of worship. These are all challenges for us. So, who is a mystic? Who is the one who has deep understanding of God? We may say the one who believes in God and has great love for God, but this is not the answer. A mystic is not the one who believes in God and loves God. It's not enough. A mystic is the one who sees God in everything and who only loves God, but then everything under God. Okay? So, if I have reached the level of understanding that whatever I see for me reflects God, and I love everything under God, I love everything as a radiation of God, then I can be a mystic. So, here we have a third party between us and God. To just love God is not a big challenge. To worship only God is not a challenge. But if I can accommodate you in my relation with God, that's the challenge. Satan failed in this challenge. Satan worshipped God, according to Islamic sources, for 6,000 years. And we don't know these years are worldly years or the years of the hereafter, which every day will be 1,000 years. So, when it was Satan and worshiping God, there was no problem. 6,000 years he worshipped God. The problem started when God asked Satan to prostrate before Adam for the sake of God. Then his arrogance came in. He said, I don't have any issue with worshiping you, but I cannot be humble before Adam. Okay? This is a lesson for us. We can always maybe worship God, but when God says, be humble before this human being, it's difficult for me. So Satan didn't listen to God. And then he insisted on his wrongdoing by justifying this. He said, you created Adam from clay, you created me from fire. I am better than Adam. Why you are asking me to prostrate before Adam? So he made more problems. He showed more ignorance. He could have just said, I don't like to do this. But he tried to justify this and put more blame on God. So he was rejected. We should take lesson. If we want to really love God, we should be able to love all creatures of God for the sake of God. Therefore, in Islamic traditions, we say to love God is not enough. To love for the sake of God is the challenge. Okay? So, if I manage to love for the sake of God, His people, then I am on the right track. Like, for example, if I love father or mother of a family, but I say, I don't bother about your children. they want to starve to death, they want to die, I don't bother. But I love you as parents. Parents say, you cannot love us without, loving our children. You know that, we are concerned about our children. Similarly, I cannot say to God, I love you, but I don't bother about your people. It's impossible. Because God has love for his creation. So, a mystic is the one that is able to see God in everything and is able to love God in everything. Okay? See God in everything and love God in everything. Not equally necessarily, because there are people who reflect God more. So I don't need to love a saint and a thief equally. Okay? I don't love a saint and thief equally. But I can still love a thief. Because this is also a creation of God. Even a thief is a sign of God. Okay? There must be a way I can help this thief for the sake of God. I cannot say I don't bother about this thief. I only bother about the saints and pious people. It has all the philosophical also implications that everything is a degree of light. Everything is a degree of existence. So nothing is absolute darkness. Now, we can approach God through acts of worship, which is very important, but more important and more fruitful than just worshiping God is to serve God. So there are two things. One is you are a worshiper, one is you are a servant. Worshipper gets credit proportionate to the worship that he does or she does. Yeah? But a servant, even when he's sleeping, gets credit. Yeah? Because I'm a servant, maybe you give me a command, maybe you say, right now I don't need to do anything, just have a rest. As long as I am in this relation of servitude, my life counts as service to my master. So, we believe that the greatest achievement of every human being is to be a true servant of God. Therefore, we keep saying in our prayer, in our call for prayer, that I bear witness that Prophet Muhammad was a servant and messenger of God. To be a servant of God is a great achievement. When Margaret and Focolare met the Pope, I think Pope said about Chiara that she was a servant of God. And for us as Muslims, this was great recognition to say someone was a servant of God. It's very, very important. And if you are a servant of God, not only you should not serve anyone else, you should not serve your ego. This is very difficult. Not to serve your ego. There is a story that I very much love. I don't know, is it just for inspiration or was real? They say when there was, a slavery, then someone went to buy a slave. And he saw there is a slave that no one is interested in buying. Maybe it was not very strong, very beautiful, or whatever. Asked this slave, what's your name? He said, whatever you call me. He was very surprised. Said, how much do you eat? Because if he was eating too much, it was not economical to buy this. So he said, whatever you give me, and as much as you give me. How much do you need to sleep? He said, as much as you allow me. You want me, I don't sleep, and then I die. It's up to you. So he said, this has no value. It's invaluable. I cannot put any price on this. This is to inspire us that when it comes to God, We should not demand from God, God, call me with this name, feed me in this way, put me in this position, let me choose my friends, etc. If I am a true servant of God, I say, I am at your service. You give me whatever name you want, you put me in touch with whatever people, and you tell me to serve whomsoever you want. The beautiful example is about Abraham. Abraham, as we believe both, was chosen by God as his friend. Yeah, we call Khalil. Yeah, his friend of God. And there is a story that once Abraham went outside, because he had this habit that whenever he didn't have guests, he was going outside to invite some people to share meal with them. He loved always to have guests. He was very hospitable. So once he went out to find some guests, on the way back, he found a man inside his house coming out. He was surprised. He asked this man, who looked like man, he was an angel, with whose permission you entered this house? It's very important, the expression. He didn't fight that person, immediately seeing a stranger in his house. He didn't start fighting. He asked question. And he didn't say, with whose permission you entered my house. He said, with whose permission you entered this house. It's very important. He didn't think he's the landlord. He said, بِإِذْنَ مَنْ دَخَلْتَ هَذِهِ الدَّارِ. With whose permission you entered this house? The angel said, بِإِذْنَ رَبِّ هَذِهِ الدَّارِ. With the permission of the Lord of this house. Abraham didn't say, I am the Lord or owner of this house. This is very important. Your house doesn't belong to you. Yeah? My house doesn't belong to me. If I'm a servant of God, my house belongs to my master. Let alone church, let alone mosque, any institution. Nothing belongs to us. It all belongs to God. But not only we want to claim that we are owner of our personal houses, we want to claim that we are owner of even religious institutions. It's a problem. It's all belong to God, owned by God. So Abraham realized that this is an angel sent by God. He didn't argue. Then the angel said, please listen very carefully. This story has helped me a lot. Abraham realized that this is an angel. Angel said, someone is chosen by God as his friend. I have come to inform him. Okay? So God has chosen someone as his friend. And he said, I have come to inform that person. If it was me and you, I think about myself. If it was me, I would say, thank you for informing me. Yeah, because I am a prophet already, a messenger of God, and this angel has come to my house, so I would have thought this is me. Yeah, there is no other way to think. But this was not the way Abraham was thinking. Abraham said, who is the one who is chosen by God as his friend so that I serve him till I die? This is the difference between Satan and Abraham. Satan refused to even do one prostration before Adam, although he was commanded. Abraham volunteers to serve a friend of God till he dies. Abraham didn't say, I must be the friend of God. No. Or even didn't say, tell me who is the friend of God. If he's from my own community, my family, I will serve him. Otherwise, no, I don't bother. He said, doesn't matter. Any person that God chooses to be his friend, I am at his service. All these things come into wings of unity if you put these pieces together. So we should not say to God, I want to only love you and worship you. Don't bring anyone else in between. Or if you bring someone else in between, it must be from my community. I should not even wait till God communicates to me. I should understand what God wants from me. Yeah? I should not say, I don't love Focolare unless God tells me. God says, how should I tell you? Use your aql, use your intellect, use your heart. If you see these are people who are given their life to my service, so you must love them. You don't need to be receiving a letter from God. So, what is important is that we need to be sensitive enough to understand the will of God, to be able to be sensitive enough to see face of God everywhere but somewhere more shining. When you see face of God somewhere is more shining, you must invest more of your energy there. So one of the implications of this, unfortunately we don't have that much time, is, as I said, you should not serve your ego. Ego has different types. One ego is, I think, every person, even in my community, my family, should serve me. This is what people like Pharaoh had. They claim to be Lord. They claim that everyone should obey them, listen to them. But one type of ego is more, secret and more hidden. And sometimes even people don't realize that this is ego. And that is religious ego. This is what religious leaders and religious, faithful people may suffer. So I want my community to be the one on the top, not because of God, because I belong to this community. I want our mosque to be the best, either compared to other mosques or compared to churches. It's me, not God. In the course of history, many times, name of God is misused to justify vicious acts. People have attacked other nations, and they say, in the name of God, we want to conquer, this land. We want to, convert them, etc. But if you go deeply into the heart, you see they are after their own glory and power and pride. It's not God. How can you be inspired by God and kill people? It's impossible. I cannot say, I'm inspired by God and I want to, ruin houses and, families, etc. But ego has no limit. And when you allow your faith and God serve your ego, sometimes then you can do things that people who have no faith cannot do. Because it gives you some kind of pseudo legitimacy that in the name of God I can claim their lives. As a human being, I cannot claim your life easily. Of course, some people can do, but a person with a little understanding cannot do that. But if you think you have a mission from God, then you can claim lives of people. So this is misuse of God. We see the name of God is used to justify slavery, apartheid, wars, many things. This is religious ego. So we have to be very careful not to let anything selfish come to our way. So sometimes I use this. Actually, the first time this idea came to my mind was in Castle Gandolfo. I had taken a group of students and we were talking about love for God. And this idea came to my mind that we have two types of love for God. One is possessive. I love God, but I want to possess God. Like I love my car, I love my house. Yeah? This type of love means that object has to serve me and I don't allow anyone else without permission of mine to use it. So if I possess God, then you cannot share with me the same God. Because this God is supposed to serve my interests. So when there is sectarian ego or tribal ego, you don't share God with others. You say they don't believe in the same God. Why? Because you are so small that you think God also must serve your ego. So God has to be also small. God cannot be God of everyone. So when we possess God, we bring God down and becomes a sectarian God, a tribal God, a nationalistic God. This is very dangerous. But the other way of loving God is to be possessed by God. If I am possessed by God, instead of me dictating to God whom can worship you, God tells me whom I have to serve. And then I find myself serving every child of God. So this is a great thing that unity of God should clarify for us. Then we have a discussion about God's plan for humanity. I think I stop here. Maybe we can have some question discussions, and hopefully in the next opportunity I have, we can continue. Thank you very much for your attention.